Japan Station is made possible in part by Patreon support. If you would like to make sure that I can keep bringing you more content like this, then head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Japan Station.
Welcome to Japan Station, a production of japankyo.com. This is the podcast where we teach you everything you should know about Japan, plus a few other things. I'm your host, content creator, founder of japankyo.com, and the anime linguist on YouTube, Tony R. Vega. Today, I've got another episode of Japanese Plus Alpha for you. So this is a podcast that I was producing exclusively for the Patreon. I was doing this in around 2020, 2021. I made a bunch of these episodes and I've been releasing them about once a month for the past few months. I've still got more episodes coming in the coming months, but if you want to check out the rest of these, you can go sign up for the Patreon. $3 a month gets you access to the rest of these episodes, and it gets you access to early versions of these episodes, plus versions without ads. Plus, it makes it so that I can keep producing this show because it costs money to produce this. So if you want to go do that, go sign up japankyo.com/Patreon. There's other ways, Ko-fi and Venmo and all that. Links are down below in the show notes if you want to help me out. I would appreciate that. Also, if you have any ideas or requests for future episodes, you can email me, mail@japankyo.com. I love getting questions and ideas, so just send them over. If there's anybody out there, I'd love to hear from you. And of course, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and maybe leave a review over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Those are always greatly appreciated. All right, so let's get into it. Here's the episode. From japankyo.com, this is Japanese Plus Alpha, a podcast about the Japanese language and its various quirks. I'm Tony Vega, and today we're talking about a subject that, well, I really enjoy. Out-of-date slang. Specifically, we're talking about
Hanakin.
Hanakin.
Hanakin desu.
So before I get into the nitty-gritty of Hanakin, what it's made up of, and kind of its background, I'll just explain what exactly it means. And I'll explain what it means in English by using an out-of-date English slang term, which is TGIF. So I really don't think this term is used much at all these days. I certainly don't hear people use it sincerely, maybe in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way. But this term was, of course, very popular in the 90s, maybe in the 80s as well. I'm not sure. I'm not that old enough to remember clearly what things were being used in the 80s. But in the 90s, definitely. There was actually a programming block on ABC, a TV channel in the US, called TGIF, and that is where shows like Full House and Family Matters used to air. So this was a very, very well-known term that was used by pretty much everyone, right? And TGIF stands for Thank Goodness It's Friday, Thank God It's Friday. It's something you would say on Friday because you were happy that the week was pretty much over and that you had the weekend coming up. Hanakin is basically the same thing. You would say it on Friday to your coworkers because you were happy that Friday night was coming. You were able to go out drinking and have a good time and then relax the rest of the weekend before going back to work on Monday. Hanakin was what everybody was looking forward to. So pretty much the same thing, at least in practical terms. But they don't mean exactly the same thing in a literal sense if you actually pick these words apart. Because like I said, thank goodness it's Friday, TGIF. Hanakin does not literally mean that. Hanakin comes from Hana no kinyobi, all right? So hana is flower, no of in this case, kinyobi is Friday. And then you shorten that into a four-mora word. You may remember that from our previous episodes. So if you want to find out more about that, go listen to the previous episode of Japanese Plus Alpha. But four-mora word basically it just comes down to 4 hiragana, right? For da 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 da. So hanakin. All right, so the kin from kinyobi is taken, and then the hana from hana, there's no shortening there. It's all shortened into hanakin. All right, so then you get that 4 mora word. Now, hana no kinyobi means the Friday of flower. Doesn't sound particularly good when you literally translate it, but basically the meaning behind this is that it's a Friday that is like a glorious flower. It's like a blooming flower in all its splendor. Something like that. Maybe I'm taking a little bit of poetic license here, but you get the kind of general image here, right? A flower is a nice, wonderful, beautiful thing, and Friday is great because it's the end of the work week, and then afterwards you're going to get to go out drinking and go out to the disco. Oh, because I should mention here, I got a little carried away there. So Hanakin apparently was popular during the bubble era in Japan. All right. So by the way, if you want to find out more about the bubble era, go listen to Ichimon Japan episode 39. It's all about that. But in a nutshell, the bubble era was basically the latter half of the 80s and early 90s in Japan. And it was a time when people had a lot of money, or at least some people had a lot of money, and they were spending it all over the place. And one of the things that was very popular to do was go out to the disco, basically the nightclubs, and go out dancing and spending money and showing off your wealth and drinking. And so it's easy to understand why you would get this word during that time, right? At least according to everything that I've seen, Hanakin seems to have been created, or at least popularized, during the bubble era, because people particularly love to go out and drink and have fun and spend money once the work week was over, and that is Friday, right? So Hanakin. Now, in case you're curious how exactly you would use this in a sentence, well, here's an example.
もうすぐ花金だね。
So, もうすぐ, that just basically means in a little bit, it's almost hanakin da ne. So, put that all together and you get, oh, it's almost TGIF. That sounds a little weird to me, but it's almost Friday. You would say this to your coworker perhaps on a Thursday afternoon, right? You're looking forward to Friday. You're looking forward to the weekend. So, you're telling them, hey, it's almost Friday. All right. So, anyway, here's another example.
花金はどうするの?
Hanakin wa dou suru no? What are you going to do on Friday, right? What are you going to do on, I think the implication here is Friday evening, right? So, because of course the Hanakin part really highlights that after work aspect of it. So, it's not being used exactly in the same way that you would use TGIF, but that same kind of general nuance, that same kind of appreciation for the fact that it's Friday, I think is similar with both terms. Interestingly, one thing that I read in an article was that some people might actually say hanamoku. So hanamoku. Moku comes from mokuyobi, right? And you write it using the character for tree because that's how you write mokuyobi. I'm not going to get into a whole thing about the way that you say the days of the week in Japanese, but I will mention something after the little outro about how I learned about the Japanese days of the week or memorized their names, but that is for the bonus section. So anyway, let's get back to this. So in the article, it said that some people that maybe they have days off, let's say on Friday and Saturday, they might say hanamoku, right? So again, it's the same kind of thing. Thank goodness it's Thursday, right? So, and some people might have said Hanakin, even though the last day of their work week wasn't literally Friday. Maybe they had Wednesdays and Thursdays off. So their Friday is Tuesday. And so when they say Hanakin, they're actually referring to Tuesday. Now, I don't know. I didn't experience this firsthand because this term was most popular in the late 80s, early 90s. Now, I'm sure this term kind of survived for a while and it's still around and people are still aware of it. But for the most part, people do not use this anymore. And I managed to find a survey where it was, I think 60-something% of people that responded said that they thought that this term was just dead, right? They thought that it wasn't used anymore. However, two articles that I found made mention of something really interesting, and that is the fact that some younger people were using this term on social media. Now, that's really interesting, right? The fact that it's younger people. Now, I don't exactly know what they mean by younger people, but given the fact that the respondents of that survey that I found was people in their 20s and 30s, and by the way, it was only 200 people that responded to the survey, so it's definitely not a scientific survey. It was for a Japanese, I think, a women's magazine. So certainly not scientific, but it's just a general data point that we could use to kind of dig into this topic further. So the point is that younger people generally seem to agree that this term is mostly dead. But since those two articles mentioned that this word was still being used on social media, what I decided to do is look on social media. So what I did was I went on Twitter and I did a search for hashtag Hanakin in Japanese. And I got plenty of results. I got results that had gone up just a couple days before I recorded this. And actually, a couple days before I recorded this happens to be a Friday. So I did find instances of people using hashtag Hanakin for the Friday before this. And I'm telling you this in, I guess you would say this is still the first quarter of 2021. So even though we are, 30 years removed from when this term was in its heyday, people on Twitter, Japanese people on Twitter, are using this. Now, I would propose that there's two aspects to this. I'm sure there are people that are using this ironically, right? They are fully aware that this is an out-of-date term and they would not use it sincerely, right? But they use it in this kind of tongue-in-cheek way, and it's kind of fun because it's such a old term, right? The term in and of itself has become a joke, and the fact that you use it is funny. The other aspect to this is that maybe, just maybe, this term is so old that it's kind of come back into vogue, right? It's kind of popular again. I would not say popular by any means because I don't think you ever really hear this in a sort of daily conversation sort of setting in a sincere way, maybe again in a joking kind of way. But that being said, perhaps these younger people have latched onto this in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way. But because it's so old, it also kind of feels new in a way, right? So maybe it's a combination of those two things. I don't know. But the fact is that some people do still use this. Just be careful if you do try to use it, because if you don't show the fact that you know that this is an out-of-date term, then people will think that you don't know it's an out-of-date term, and that is not cool, right? So there you go. That's Hanakin. Again, if you want to find out more about how I learned the days of the week in Japanese, well, you gotta stay tuned until after the outro if you're a patron. If you're not a patron, then, well, sorry, go check out the Patreon. All right, so thank you for listening and see you next time on Japanese Plus Alpha. Okay, so it's story time. So I learned Japanese in high school. Well, I started learning Japanese in junior high, maybe 7th grade or 8th grade. I just got a book, started learning on my own. But the first class that I took was in high school. And our teacher happened to be from Taiwan. And I'm just going to call him Mr. C. And he was quite the character. And he did know Japanese because people of a certain age in Taiwan do grow up learning Japanese. And basically what I'm saying here is that he was not young. He was a rather aged man. And he was quite a character, very, very interesting guy, and not exactly the best at classroom management. And so that class ended up being known for being a quote-unquote slack class. And so you got a lot of slackers in the class, people just trying to get an easy A. But I won't get into that. That's a whole other discussion. It's a funny experience that I had in that class. But anyway, the point is that he taught us things sometimes in interesting ways. Anyway, when it came to teaching certain things, sometimes he would go off on certain tangents and tell us rather unorthodox stories or unexpected stories. And so when it came time to talk about the days of the week, I assume this is what sparked it. But anyway, the point is that he told us a story related to the days of the week. And so he said that back in the day, I guess during World War II, I'm not even sure if he was old enough. I guess he was old enough to be like at least a kid in World War II. I really don't know how old he was, but I assume he was just a young child in World War II. And then because he also made mention of, I think, the Korean War. So I think by the time the Korean War rolled around, he was old enough to fight in it. But again, I'm not sure. The point is that he said back in the war, they didn't have weekends. So as you probably know, right, the days of the week in Japanese are, let me start with Sunday, Nichiyobi, Getsuyobi, Kayobi, Suiyobi, Mokuyobi, Kinyobi, Doyobi, right? So Nichiyobi, Sunday, Doyobi, Saturday, full cycle, 7 days, of course, right? And so you can shorten this down to just the first part of the word because yobi is shared by all of them, right? Basically, you could just say like that's day. That's the day part of it, even though B is the day part, but don't worry about it. So getsuyobi, you shorten that down to just the first part, the first kanji, that's gets. And so you do that for all of them and you end up with gets, ka, sui, mok, kin, do, nich, right? And that is the 7 days. Now, what he was saying was that there were 2 Mondays and 2 Fridays back in the war days because people needed to work in order to support the war and build warships and do whatever the heck they needed to do in order to support Japan and make sure that they had everything they needed so that they could win the war. And so people couldn't be slacking off in the weekends. So Japan got rid of the weekends and just made 2 Fridays and 2 Mondays. And so what he would do is he would say this in Japanese. He would say what I just did, right? The whole week with just the first component, but with 2 Mondays and 2 Fridays. So he would go, gets, ka, sui, mok, kin, kin. Gets, ka, sui, mok, kin, kin. And so this is just stuck in my head, I guess, because it's just such a vivid story. And the way that you say this, right? It has such a rhythm to it. Gets, ka, sui, mok, kin, kin. So it's really easy to remember. And so what I did was I just memorized that. And then, like I said, you just add on the yobi part. And then aside from that, I just remembered that doyobi was Saturday and nichiyobi was Sunday. So I just remembered 2 and then that little chant kind of thing. And then for a long time, when I had to think of what day it was, I would go back and think like, oh, gets, kasui mo kin kin. Okay. And then there's do and then there's nich. And then so I would do this in my head to figure it out. Nowadays, I don't do that anymore because it's just, I don't have to. I have memorized it. I have internalized it. But back then, back in high school, yeah, I'm sure I did that plenty of times because it's yeah, so that is how I learned the days of the week in Japanese. If you're having trouble learning the days of the week, I don't know if that's an effective way, but maybe it is. Gets, ka, sui, mo, kin, kin. 2 Mondays, 2 Fridays. It's a peculiar aspect of Japanese history. I have heard this story in other places, so I'm pretty sure it is accurate. And it's also a unique way to learn your days of the week. All right. Hope you found that interesting. See you next time.